not about anything other than whether or not there is a national security threat. And that's the case we're making at NAFTA and WTO tribunals. So, and we have been saying this, Mark, since before the 232 tariffs were imposed, and we've said it throughout. So it's been very important for us to be true to our own arguments about this and to keep these two in different lanes. Having said that, we also, and the Prime Minister was absolutely right to make the point as he did on November 30th, it was absolutely important to not hide our displeasure. And I'll just say one more thing about November 30th, what happened there, because this is a key point. In addition to signing the new NAFTA, we signed some side letters between Canada and the U.S. Those letters entered into legal force on the moment of signing. So they entered into legal force on November 30th. Crucially for us, one of those side letters was about 232 on cars and car parts. And it's in force, it exists, and it provides Canada with what I think of as a flood insurance policy, which effectively protects our car sector from 232 tariffs were they to be levied on other countries by the U.S. on cars and car parts. That's a pretty great thing to have.
Let me ask, I think we're wrapping up. One more before we have questions from the audience. Let me ask on that, though. President Trump on the way home, I was on Air Force One with him on the way home from Buenos Aires. He says, I'm going to terminate NAFTA. Now that we've got this deal signed, I'm going to go ahead and terminate NAFTA as soon as I get back. I think he then realized that it was President Bush's big accomplishment, and maybe doing it the week of President Bush's funeral wasn't the nicest thing in the world. But he's going to do it, he says, anyway, in the coming days. They would start a 6-month clock, if I understand, in terms of withdrawal. In effect, he's daring Congress. You have to pass this new one by 6 months, otherwise we have nothing, or we go back we actually have to go back to a Canada-U.S. free trade agreement separate from the Mexico,
right.
Is that right?
It's never been abrogated,
right.
And it kind of lies underneath
right.
NAFTA.
So if NAFTA, in theory, went away, there would still be this underlying thing that would govern our trade relationship. But what do you make of Congress and your Parliament? What will this does not go into effect until both those and the Mexican legislature passes it? Will you have any trouble here in Canada? And what if Congress comes back and says, well, we've got all these different things we want to do with the enacting legislation? Does that unravel things if they begin mucking around in it?
Okay, so many questions there. And, the core answer is our work with the United States and Mexico was the work of negotiating this new NAFTA. And the U.S., in your system, you clearly designate who is the person we're supposed to negotiate with. It is the USTR, in this case, Ambassador Lighthizer. He was our counterparty from the US, and we worked at it really hard and spent a lot of time at it, but at the end of the day, we got an agreement with the US and Mexico. At this point, as you pointed out, Peter, what's left is the domestic processes in each country, in Canada, in the US, and in Mexico. I think as Canadians, we would not take very warmly to another country getting involved in our own domestic ratification process. And we take the same respectful attitude towards the U.S. domestic ratification process. That's something for Ambassador Lighthizer and the administration to handle. And I will say, Ambassador Lighthizer, he is certainly a tough negotiator for the U.S. I hope he would say I'm a tough negotiator for Canada. But he's also a real pro.
Okay, I think we're about to go to a question from the audience. If I can have one last one as well, which is a change of subject, which is it's really partly because of your own background in our world as a journalist. And I know this is not your brief, but your government's recently announced a package of tax credits, about $600 million worth of tax credits, which are intended, the detail yet to come, to support the journalism in Canada. I guess my question is, give us a sense of about how you feel the current state of journalism in this country, its economics, and whether 600 million of tax credits over 5 years is really the kind of scale of intervention which is likely to support it and strengthen it.
So, yeah, that is a great question. And I have known you since before I became a politician. And I think, even in that time, we've had conversations about how hard it is to fund good journalism today. It is a truism that I think all people know, but certainly, you guys as current journalists, me as a former one, are very aware of. It's hard to find the business model that supports journalism. At the same time, and I'm going to come back to where we started, liberal democracy is under threat. And we really believe, our government, in the importance of journalism as a key pillar of liberal democracy. Without good journalism, you cannot have good democracy. I was really pleased that Time magazine named journalists as their heroes of the year. And one of my favorite books is Tim Snyder's new book, The Path to Unfreedom, and he dedicated it to journalists who he calls the heroes of our time. So that's why we did it, is because we know, you're faced with these two things. One, the business model is really challenged, but two, your society needs it to be healthy. So I feel very comfortable that we've done the right thing. Details still need to be worked out. And, the other thing I'll say, which you will understand very much given your own history, Mark, is, Mark used to run the BBC. We love the CBC, right? Yeah. Canada also has a tradition of a public broadcaster that I believe plays a crucial role in, informing our democracy and also actually in keeping our country together.
Great.
So yeah, Mark, we've got four mics in the audience. Raise your hand. We'll try our best to get to everybody. Tell the minister your name and make your question really short. No speeches, please. Who's first?
And if you live in University Rosedale, you can say that too. Oh, yeah. I have to be extra nice to you.
First question in the West End over there.
Oh, hi. Elizabeth Hurley, and thank you very much for the work you do. I just wanted to ask you about, with an election coming up in Canada, what's the government going to do about misinformation and other governments that might interfere in our country?
Do you want me to answer one by one or let everybody ask?
No, let's go one by one.
One by one? Okay. Yeah. Elizabeth, I think that is a great question. Corinna Gould, our Minister for Democratic Institutions, has been talking about that, as has Ralph Goodale. I think we should not take the threat of malign foreign interference lightly at all. We as a government are definitely working on that. But the other thing that I would say is, I think above all, what matters is informed people. We've met as part of our work on this. We've spent a lot of time talking to the Baltic republics. Canada leads the NATO battle group in Latvia, so we talk a lot with the Latvians, but also with the Estonians and the Lithuanians. And we had a meeting a couple of months ago with a group of Estonians, including the guy in Estonia whose job is to fend off malign interference, which in that case means Russia, and that's a big job. And I asked him that question, and Corinna was there too, and he said, you know what? The strength that we have is Estonians are really aware that this effort is there and that it's constant. And that aware citizenry is actually our biggest secret. It's not about fancy cyber stuff. It's about people being smart and alert. And at the end of the day, I think that's going to be a key part for us.
Person near the back, stand up, please.
Hello, Minister. Jeffrey Weeb. Those nefarious words, middle power. If it was ever fact, it had some sort of currency at one point. Is it still relevant now?
Yeah, I think it is. I am careful to qualify when I talk about Canada as a middle power, because I think since we live right next door to the Americans, we sort of think of ourselves as a middle power, but we're the 10th largest economy in the world, and to give you a sense of what that means, our economy is a little bigger than Russia's, right? So think about that for a minute. We're not that small. people think we're pretty attractive. I was, as I mentioned, I was in Berlin on Friday and Saturday, and there was an event on Saturday during which the German foreign minister said, we really wish you guys were geographically a little closer because we'd love to invite you to join the EU.
What with the UK?
No, he said it. It's public. He said you guys would make a great European country. He didn't say that. He said we love the Brits, but we'd really like to have you guys. We also speak French, so... I think we need to be careful as Canadians not to think that we're smaller or less influential than we actually are. Having said that, it's true we're not a superpower. And there are ultimately only 36 million of us. And so that's why I think that we need to work so hard. That's two conclusions come from that. One is the rules-based multilateral order is essential for us. A world in which might makes right is a really bad world for Canada. We really, really need a world of rules. And I think Canadians really get that. I think that's one reason that a lot of us feel so strongly about it. The second thing is we know that we can be more effective when we act in concert with our allies. And, what I suggested to one of Mark's earlier questions is, I think, at the WTO, since it's been so hard to progress beyond the Doha round, this idea of doing plurilateral deals has developed, that you kind of get groups of like-minded countries to move together in a direction. These deals are open so new countries can come in. And maybe it's because I'm a former trade minister, but I think we have to start thinking and working a little bit in that direction in foreign policy too. And as maybe a big middle power, that's the kind of thing that I think Canada can and should be good at.
Sort of in the middle here.
Dennis Danneman. Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate in economics, said two things prevent countries from going into poverty. One is a free press and other are democratic elections. How are we going to make sure that the cyber wars and that had occurred in the States in the elections don't happen in Canada the next time around?
It's an excellent question. As I said in response to Elizabeth's question, we're aware of it. I think we have to be very aware of the danger of malign foreign interference. I think we need to have, as strong as possible of an impartial and independent democratic media, or not democratic media, also that is across the country. There have been some interesting studies correlating media deserts, places that don't have their own media with a higher incidence of populism. But I think at the end of the day, what it's going to come down to is Canadians, Canadian citizens, Canadian voters making an active political choice. And also it's about political leadership. I really think, as I think is evident from this conversation, I believe so strongly how precious and valuable our liberal democracy is. And so it's going to be my job and the job of my colleagues to talk to a lot of Canadians and say, guys, this is really important. Let's be sure we don't let it be wrecked.
Back over on the west side. Yep.
Hi, William Cohen. As our NATO allies, such as Hungary, Turkey, Poland, begin to turn away from liberal democracy and towards authoritarianism, how is NATO working to ensure the strength of the alliance, and what's Canada's role in that?
There are too many good questions this evening. I would put that into two parts. One is what we're doing in NATO, and the other is what do you do with rising authoritarianism among your friends, as well as among countries that are not military allies. In terms of NATO, and I was just at the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels last week, Canada is very engaged in NATO right now. We lead, as I mentioned, we lead the NATO battle group in Latvia, Operation Enhanced Forward Presence. That is a big and important commitment. We have just taken on the NATO command in the new NATO training mission in Iraq, and the Canadian commander is already there on the ground starting to get to work. We are very engaged in supporting Romania and our allies in the Black Sea. So we really,